This video was made in collaboration with Urmaker. A separate collaboration has been uploaded to his channel, which you can access via the annotations or the links in the description. If you haven't subscribed, you probably should.
I live in a country town. It's not too large, but it's relatively close to a major city and the border of my state. Being a country town, unemployment and drug use are quite high, and it's only getting worse since the drug meth, aka ice, came into our region. This took place earlier today. I was at home with my mom. It started off as just screaming, which isn't fairly common, but does happen with some of our neighbors. Mom gets up to have a look. It's a skinny lad who is obviously under the influence of hard drugs. Once he makes eye contact with my mom, he runs up our driveway and starts hitting and kicking our taxi. He is going completely mental, screaming and swearing. My mom can be a pretty scary woman, so she calls our large dog out and straight up tells the crackhead to leave our property or she will set the dog on him. I rang the number to our local emergency services. At this point I am freaking out. This lad is dangerous, and he is in our yard, and obviously under the influence. The operator doesn't sound too concerned, but agrees to send the police out. The drug addict then runs across the road to an elderly neighbor's yard. He turns on their water and starts flooding their front garden, and strips completely naked. He then proceeds to cover himself in mud and bathe in their bird bath, screaming incoherently the entire time. After doing this for a few moments, he then starts attacking their cars and smearing mud everywhere. At this point, my mom walks back outside to the driveway to check on the taxi. Once the crackhead sees that she's come back out, he runs back over and starts screaming, and then begins to try to break into my car while kicking it the entire time. Finally, one of the local police officers shows up as the crackhead's kicking my car trying to break in. As soon as he sees the policeman, the drug addict runs off. He ends up getting caught by the officer on the other side of the neighboring yard, punching a fence and trying to jump it. The policeman tackles him and holds him down while calling for backup. Not too long after, 2 more police arrive, and the drug addict is still yelling obscenities and trying to get attention. He focuses on me for a lot of it. He seems absolutely crazy and possibly rabid. A short while later, the police come to our door. It turns out the drug addict had a wallet on him that wasn't his and was screaming about his kids and where they were. Apparently they were missing. He had also shat himself and was completely covered in his own feces. Half an hour later, an ambulance arrived. They took him to the hospital, and we haven't seen him since. And I hope we don't.
Fresh out of college, I took a teaching job in a small town in central Wisconsin. In my sophomore creative writing class, I assigned a flash fiction exercise around Halloween. We studied urban legends and folklore, and it was the students' turn to construct stories of their own. Assignment length: 100 to 1,000 words. Directions: scare me. The submission quality was as expected. These were sophomores after all, but one story stood out halfway through my stack of papers. A piece by a quiet student named Jake. His first-person flash fiction story seemed so real, like it was dipped in reality, a little too closely, almost like he wasn't making it up, but had been retelling something that happened to him. I put it aside, impressed. Kate's submission was the last paper in the stack. I remember the reading experience vividly, the beads of sweat accumulating around my temples, the clickety-click of the red pen in my hand, and a weird feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach. I placed it on top of Jake's story, and I thought, what the hell am I gonna do? I still have photocopies of the original stories, and I often wonder, why do I still have these? But there's something about them. They're so interconnected, and there's something so raw and beautiful about them. I have a strong affinity for interesting student writing, and it'd be a shame to let the flames of these stories be extinguished. I'll share the students' pieces and the subsequent events that transpired. Here we go. I do enjoy a good story. Jake's Flash Fiction. My parents put Grandma Rosie in a home when she started to lose her grip on reality, they said. I still found it cruel, but she seemed content. Content enough, I guess. I remember visiting her. She had an old wooden rocking chair that faced the window. Outside was nothing but flat fields of green. The green would eventually fade, and when it snowed, it was carpets of white for miles and miles. I'm not sure which season Grandma Rosie liked the most. She didn't do a lot of talking. She mainly listened to her radio, and always one station, 89.1. But 89.1 never had a signal. It was always static. Grandma Rosie listened to the static all day, seemingly willingly waiting out her life. No one could reach her. I visited one day to drop off a box of chocolates. Grandma Rosie rocked slowly in her chair with large headphones over her ears, staring out the window, watching the snow fall. I couldn't tell if she knew I was there. I walked over and placed the chocolates on a small table, and her hand suddenly reached across and snatched my wrist. "Shh," she whispered. "Listen." Grandma Rosie leaned in close, and I put my ear to hers. I lifted up the cup of her headphone and listened. There was only static. I was about to speak, but she covered my mouth with her hand. "Listen closer," she said. I did, but all I heard was more static. "Soon they will come," she said. "They will come to take me away." This freaked me out a little, and I went home. I told my mom and my dad about what happened, but they didn't think it was weird. I kept thinking about it. One night I couldn't sleep, so I buzzed my friend Abby in our walkie-talkies. She lived across the street, and somehow she knew all about 89.1. She told me it was an old legend in our town, and you needed two things to explore the legend further: a radio and a closet with the door slightly open. Face away from the closet, tune in to 89.1 and listen very closely. At some point through the static, you'll hear the faint sounds of an organ, distant screams, and the dragging of metal chains along a gravelly surface. The open doorway is an invitation. Keep your eyes closed, and only if you keep your eyes closed, a figure will appear and drag you into the closet. From there, your fate is unknown. "How do you know this?" I asked.
"I've heard about it,"
she said.
"Don't tell anyone. The less people that know, the better."
I looked out my window and saw Abby in her bedroom. She put her finger up to her lips.
"This is our secret,"
the walkie-talkie buzzed. For the next few days, I kept thinking about the ritual and Grandma Rosie. Why would she be playing this game? Why did she want to be dragged into an unknown fate? I again told my parents that I was worried about Grandma Rosie, and they were dismissive.
"Ever since Grandpa died, I think she just wants to let go,"
my mom said.
"She wants to be with him."
I wanted to know more, so I decided to try the game myself. It was late at night, and I opened up my closet door just a crack. I sat on my bed with my back to the closet, tuned my radio to 89.1, and put on my headphones. I heard the static, and I closed my eyes. I sat there for a long time, focusing very hard on the static. The longer I sat there, the more it felt like my room was shrinking. Kind of like the space was filling up with something else, like I wasn't alone. In my headphones, I heard the distant organ, and I heard the screams that seemed far away, but sounded like they were getting closer. The screeching of the metal began, and then I heard a voice.
"Open your eyes!
I jumped from my bed, very startled. Abby was laughing hysterically through the walkie-talkie. I looked around my bedroom. I was alone. I looked out the window and saw Abby smiling and giggling. She brought the walkie-talkie up to her mouth.
I totally scared you,
she said.
There's no one there. You're such a wuss.
I noticed the closet door. It was wide open. The static of 89.1 hissed from my headphones.
I was only joking,
the walkie-talkie chirped. But I wasn't so sure it was a joke. Grandma Rosie died 2 weeks later in her sleep. Her time had come, and I was done fooling around with legends and superstitions. Jake's story was the most interesting of the bunch. His writing needed some tightening, sure, but the ideas were there. A mysterious legend, sentimental characterizations, and an ambiguous ending. I truly thought he had invented the whole thing, until I read Kate's submission. Kate's flash fiction.
Panic, fear. No one would believe me. Not ever. I told him I was joking about everything. Helps me sleep at night. But I know what I saw. A young boy, a ritual, and death. Death itself. A black death with a clutching grip. An entity that surrounds its victim, dragging a companion to its secret and eternal lair. I was joking all along, which made it okay. I had to know more. I went to her room. It felt recently vacated, like the plug had just been pulled from a sink. Headphones on the floor. Static. Nothing but static. Noises from the closet. Labored breathing. Fingernails squeaking on the door from the inside. I clutched the handle. Something else. Something dark. Can't open it. Won't open it. Refuse to let it out. I slowly back away. Tiny voice squeaking. Help me. Static echoing in the small room. Nothing but static. I close the door on my way out. I won't let it out. I won't tell. I'll never tell. My story doesn't exist. It's simply not there. It's nothing but static.
Here, I had two seemingly intertwined stories. Jake's more traditional folklore story, and Kate's personalized flash fiction, focusing on emotion, regrets, and secrets. Perhaps I'd been swimming in urban legends too long, or perhaps I'd been the victim of too many horrendous students' essays and stories to count, but I couldn't shake the notion. This seemed real. A few days after Halloween, I kept Kate after school. I wanted to know more. Specifically, was she the Abby character in Jake's story? And was she confessing to visiting the grandmother in her own piece? I pulled out Kate's flash fiction and asked about how she wrote it. What was her inspiration? She shrugged.
I guess it's avant-garde. I was just experimenting with ideas. Did you like it?
I nodded. It was an interesting piece. I told her.
Have you ever heard of 89.1?
Kate asked me. I started to speak, but couldn't. A few words sputtered out, but were interrupted by Kate's laughing.
Oh my God, Mr. Patrick, the whole thing was just a joke.
No, this is Patrick. Kate explained how she and Jake conspired to write multiple viewpoints of the same story, partially as a creative writing exercise, but mainly just to screw with me. The whole thing was made up. It was a Halloween prank.
We so got you, Mr. Patrick.
Kate laughed. I smiled uncomfortably. It was a good one, and yes, they got me. I told her that I enjoyed her piece. let's continue developing your avant-garde writing and to enjoy her Halloween. But something didn't feel right. I had drinks with a veteran freshman English instructor, me the first-year teacher new in town, and he the wily old mentor. I told him about the assignment and the stories Jake and Kate turned in. He laughed and thought about it a bit more.
"That just seems off," he said. "You said Jake and Kate conspired to play a joke. They were thick as thieves in my class at the start of the school year, but in the fall they stopped talking. Wouldn't even look at each other anymore. Had some sort of falling out. I guess they made up."
For the next few weeks, I watched Jake and Kate closely in my class and in the hallways. They didn't speak once. Never even looked at each other. I scheduled a story conference with Jake and let him know how much I'd enjoyed his growth as a writer, especially his Halloween flash fiction piece. I grinned and told him that his prank with Kate had totally burned me. Jake smiled awkwardly.
"We got you, huh?"
he said.
"It was Kate's idea."
Everything was made up, he claimed. There was no 89.1, and he had no grandmother who passed away in a home. All the characters and situations were straight, 100% fiction. I told him good job and to keep writing. Still, the situation seemed amiss, like I was missing part of the act. Was it possible that these two were so committed to screwing with me that they wouldn't even speak at school? Or maybe that they were dating and didn't want anyone else to know, so they played it cool in the hallways and in class? They were 15-year-old kids, after all. That seemed reasonable. But it was keeping me awake at night. Nothing else mattered. I taught during the day, and I obsessed over the stories in the evening. News, sports, and current events faded into the background. The real world slipped away. I pushed forward. Armed with a couple of possible last names, thank you school records, I called senior citizen homes in the area. I was trying to track down my mom's old friend, Rosie, I told them. Each phone call forwarded the same script. The receptionist went through the files and found nothing. No one there by either last name I had. I scoured the internet, and I spent too much time in stacks of the local library, and I found no folklore or urban legends relating to 89.1, and each time I felt like quitting, I pulled out my photocopy of Kate's story. She had visited Jake's grandmother. It simply felt so real. I knew it wasn't fake. In a last-ditch effort, I spent a lot of time alone in my bedroom, listening to the static of 89.1 with my eyes closed and the door slightly ajar. I'd own in on the static, and I'd listen deeply and intently for the chimes of a pipe organ, the harsh and troubled screams in the distance, and the clinkety-clink of the metal chains. Sometimes I'd think it was there, and I just had to focus a little harder, and I'd sense a presence in my bedroom about to creep out of my closet, the dark mist waiting to drag me away. I wanted it to come, because I wanted this story to be real, but it didn't come. One day at school, I saw Jake and Kate smiling and laughing at Jake's locker. I walked past them, and Kate winked at me. That was the clincher. I finally succumbed to the notion that I'd been had. It was over. I ended my search for 89.1. I had drinks again with my colleague. Many drinks this time. And I drunkenly told him about everything I'd been doing. He found my investigation ridiculous and ultimately dangerous.
"You like stories too much," he said. "If I didn't know any better, it's almost like you're trying to write one of your own. Just let it go."
I pulled out the photocopied stories from my back pocket, and I pressed them down on the bar, staining them with the splashes of beer. My colleague picked up Jake's story, and he took a look at it for the first time. His eyes skimmed the page, and they stopped cold.
"Wait," he said. "You never told me about Abby."
I shrugged. Abby was Kate, I told him. He was all part of the game.
"I wonder,"
he thought aloud to himself. He laid it out for me. A year ago, about 10 months before I moved into town, An 8th grader named Abby had gone missing, seemingly vanished into thin air. One minute she was alone in her room, and the next minute she was gone. Some suspected that she ran away, but there were no clues, no evidence of foul play, no suspicious or shady family members or neighbors. She was simply gone. I read Kate's piece again. My heart sank. The whole time I assumed it was about her visiting the grandmother, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe the squeaks and pleas coming from the closet were coming from Abby. Kate never specified who she was visiting or where she was. I read the avant-garde flash fiction one more time, honing in on every word, just to be sure. And at that moment, everything changed. I spoke with the school administration, they contacted the authorities, and the police had conversations with Jake and Kate. It went nowhere. It didn't matter that Abby had lived across the street from Jake. It didn't matter that we had words on paper. They were just stories, the kids said. Only stories. Complete fiction. Jake had no grandparents in a home anyway. They were sorry if they'd scared anyone. They were Halloween stories after all, and pretty ambiguous stories at that. Jake even tearfully apologized for naming a fictional character after a missing girl. It hadn't crossed his mind. And I was now the monster for dragging 2 innocent kids into this mess. The staff ostracized me, and the town crucified me. I was done. I left the teaching profession soon after that. I walked out of the school holding my small crate of supplies, and Kate smirked at me with a knowing glance through a first-floor window. I haven't seen her since. I didn't take much with me, but I did take the photocopies of the stories. I pull them out occasionally and relive the past, and sometimes late at night, I'll get a fire in my belly and a burning desire to travel back to that small Wisconsin town. Maybe Grandma Rosie was a great aunt that Jake's family referred to as Grandma, or maybe it was an elderly family friend. Maybe I missed something about the missing girl, about 89.1, about Kate's intentions. Perhaps I can try the ritual a few more times, just to see what happens. Or maybe it's all just bullshit. That was 10 years ago, and I'm probably the only one that thinks there's a shred of truth in those stories. I'd been wasting my time, but it still keeps me up at night. The slim chance that it's all true. And oftentimes the idea of it is something I contemplate more than what really happened to Abby and the grandmother in the story. If it is true, why did the kids write it all down like that? I don't have a good answer, and I'll never have one. I suppose that just like me, they really just enjoy a good story.